Hello everyone. Welcome back to another day. We are here live for Hickory Street Church of Christ. Quick announcement: June the 7th. June the 7th. Let's see if I can bring that up for you. Maybe you can see this here. A little bit small. That's the first Sunday in June. We're going to be traveling to. Not traveling anywhere, actually. That's the next thing I was going to talk about. We're going to have services again at the church building. Of course, all the social distancing and things like that will be in place. But June the 7th is the tentative date in which we will be joined back together in person instead of these virtual meetings. Although I think these virtual meetings have been fun. Laura and I have to travel though. We have to travel on Thursday, June the 4th, to a wedding, and so I'm not going to be able to do the live stream June the 3rd, which is a Wednesday, on account of having to be at the wedding on the 4th. So yeah, I got to travel on the 3rd and be there on the 4th for the wedding. So that's what's going on Wednesday the 3rd and Wednesday the 4th. I'll still be here this Sunday and next Sunday, of course, and next Wednesday, or this upcoming Wednesday. But June the 3rd, I will not be live. Okay, all right. I think that's all. Okay, Miss Anita, good morning. Good morning to you. Hopefully, they got all the pictures you needed on your flash drive and everything worked out with that, like we talked about the other day. Okie dokie. We are in, what are we in? We're in Ecclesiastes chapter 9. So, the book of Ecclesiastes, and I've got to just reemphasize this over and over again, shows us a progression of Solomon's journey to wisdom, to trying to find the answer to life. And to be quite honest with you, Ecclesiastes 9 is probably one of the most depressing sections in the book that there is. Okay, it's probably one of the most controversial passages in the book that there is. And if you were to look at Ecclesiastes as being a book of wisdom for how we should live life and not a progression of Solomon's journey in trying to understand wisdom, then Ecclesiastes 9 would be filled with, in that criteria, all kinds of contradictions. And we'll see why that is in a moment. If you don't take this view that Ecclesiastes shows this journey of wisdom and doesn't offer any answers that fit with his conclusion earlier on in the book, you're going to have some problems with Ecclesiastes chapter 9. So again, we'll talk about that in a moment. So as we're reading Ecclesiastes, I encourage you to become fully, to become fully immersed in the drama of the book. Solomon's contention with God, his problems with the vanity in life, with the emptiness in life. You have to become fully immersed in that, because then the conclusion of the book will make all that more sense to you and have that much more meaning to you. So you need to allow the words that he says here in chapter 9 to sink deep. Truly consider the things that he says. That way when we come to the conclusion in chapters 11 and 12, that it'll hit harder, than it would if you just go to those passages without considering what he says earlier. All right, let's begin. Ecclesiastes 9, verse 1. I have taken all this to my heart and explain it, that righteous men, wise men, and their deeds are in the hand of God. Now, at first glance, that seems like a good thing, right? Because we sing the song, he's got the whole world in his hands, right? And when you read this at first, again, seems like a good thing. However, keep in mind what was said earlier in the book, specifically in chapters 1. In chapter 1, remember, we read, I set my mind to seek and explore by wisdom concerning all that has been done under heaven. It is a grievous task which God has given to the sons of man to be afflicted with. I've seen all the works which have been done under the sun, and behold, all is vanity and striving after wind. So we shouldn't necessarily see this in verse 1 as a good thing, and we're going to see why that is as we progress through the chapter. Just to illustrate this, keep in mind all of the times in Ecclesiastes that the writer, the preacher says, you know, don't seek to be too righteous, and also don't seek to be too wise. You know, what is wisdom? Because we all die anyways, right? And so you have to keep those themes in mind as you read chapter 9 and verse 1 and what it means for the deeds to be in the hand of God. One passage that's going to be referenced as we go through here, he's going to talk about time. And we remember this very popular funeral passage in Ecclesiastes 3. There's an appointed time for everything. There's a time for every event under heaven, a time to give birth, a time to die, etc., etc. And then he says this in verse 9, what profit is there to the workers from that in which he toils? I have seen the task which God has given the sons of men with which to occupy themselves. He's made everything appropriate in his time, as you see there in verse 11. He set eternity in their heart, yet so that man will not find out the work which God has done from the beginning to the end. And so this is a very pessimistic section of Scripture, even though it's used optimistically in sermons and funerals and things like that. He's not happy in Ecclesiastes chapter 3. And as we read 9, we're going to see that even more. This is just the peak of his despair, almost. All right, so Ecclesiastes chapter 9, verse 1 says, I've taken all this to my heart and explain it, that righteous men, wise men, and their deeds are in the hand of God. Man does not know whether it will be love or hatred. Anything awaits him. So even though, I guess because their deeds are in the hand of God, they don't know whether they're going to receive love or hatred. That's what it appears to mean in verse 1. And you're about to find that out in verse 2. It is the same for all. There is one fate for the righteous and one for the wicked. For the good, for the clean, for the unclean, for the man who offers a sacrifice, and for the one who does not sacrifice. All the good man is, so, or rather, as the good man is, so is the sinner. As the swearer is, so is the one who is afraid to swear. He says, basically then, what's the point? The same fate reaches everyone, the righteous and the wicked, the good and the clean, the good and the evil, the clean and the unclean, the one who sacrifices, the faithful religious Israelite, and the one who doesn't sacrifice, the one who's rejecting the law and rejecting the book of Leviticus and things like that. He says, as the good man is, so is the sinner. So is the swearer. So is the one who's afraid to swear. Doesn't matter what you do, who you are, where you live, how you live. He says there is one fate for all. Now, our response as Christians, and as those who know the conclusion of the book and aren't hopping into the middle, right? With no knowledge of the conclusion, our response is, well, the fate's not the same for all. Though all may physically die, we learn in Hebrews 9 that it is appointed unto man once to die and after this judgment. So it's not the same for all, because for the righteous man, he'll go to his eternal reward in heaven, but for the wicked man, he'll be perish outside of the presence of God. Whatever it is that you say. And so we have a good answer for verse 2. But he's not done here. This is an evil in all that is done under the sun, that there is one fate for all men. Now remember, who set up the fate? Who designed the fate, according to the writer of Ecclesiastes, right? Is it not God? And so he's saying here, this apparent situation that God has put into place, he sees it as futility, as vanity, as evil. And let's continue and see what his opinion is. Furthermore, the hearts of the sons of men are full of evil, and insanity is in their hearts throughout their lives. Afterwards, they go to the dead. For whoever is joined with all the living, there is hope. Surely a live dog is better than a dead lion. For the living know they will die, but the dead, he says, do not know anything, nor have they any longer a reward, for their memory is forgotten. Well, what dead people? If you go back to verse 2, it doesn't matter. Righteous, wicked, good, evil, clean, unclean. The man who sacrifices, the man who doesn't sacrifice. The good man, the sinner. The swearer, the one who's afraid to swear. He says it doesn't matter. He says all go to the same place. All have the same fate. Their memory is forgotten. They don't know anything. They no longer have any reward, right? This is a very pessimistic view of death in Ecclesiastes chapter 9. And it sums up the view that he's presented throughout the entire book up to this point. Look at verse 4. Whoever is joined with all the living, there is hope. Surely a live dog is better than a dead lion. Now, in 21st century terms, what do we think of? When we think of live dog, we think of, golden retriever. Well, maybe not live dog. Awkward. But, we think of Old Yeller, right? Golden retriever. We think of Air Bud, live dog. We think of Marley and Me, the Hound from Fox and Hound. We think of this lovable, cute little fluffy, sits on your, sits in your living room with you while you watch TV, gets pets from you, goes out and walks with you, all those sorts of things. And then we think of a lion, we think of something to be feared, something to be, terrified of. Now, their perspective, the biblical perspective of dogs and lions, for example, in Revelation 21, right? You have the dogs outside of the gate. They're considered, unclean. They're associated with death. In Jesus' account of the rich man and Lazarus in Luke 16, the dogs licked the wounds of Lazarus, right? And so dogs are not a respectable member of society like they are in our. Jesus is the lion of the tribe of Judah. A lion is a representation of everything that is royal and strong and mighty. And so he says in verse 4, to shock the reader, a live dog is better than a dead lion. Remember earlier in the book, the writer Solomon had already said multiple times that, what's the difference in a man and an animal? For they both have the same end, right? And he's continuing this theme here in Ecclesiastes chapter 9. He says, a live dog is better than a dead lion. It would better to be alive than despicable than, than dead and have all your glory wash away. Now this seems a little bit against what we had read earlier in the book. I believe it was Ecclesiastes chapter 7. Remember what he said there, that the day of one's death is better than the day of one's birth, right? So, he's developing his thoughts here in Ecclesiastes chapter 9. He's constantly sort of adjusting his positions, examining different routes of joy and wisdom in life, and again, he concludes that all of this is vanity and the end. Okay, here's why it's better to be alive than dead, he says in verse 5. For the living know they will die, but the dead do not know anything, nor have they any longer a reward, for their memory is forgotten. This reminds me of this little joke by a comedian named Victor Borghi, who was a pianist. And he said that he was talking to his eye doctor. And his eye doctor said this, and obviously he's correct about this since he's an eye doctor. He says that a man with one eye can see more than a man with two eyes can see. Well, why is that? Well, the man with one eye can see the other man's two eyes, but the man with two eyes can only see the other man's one. And so this seems very much like that. Why are the living better than the dead? Well, at least the living know that they're going to die. The dead don't know anything at all. They don't have any memory. Their memory's forgotten. They don't have any reward. They don't know anything. Again, a very pessimistic view of death. Now, one of the things I want to point out is a lot of people go to this passage to teach this idea, it's called soul sleep, that at death, the individual has no knowledge of anything like that, until the resurrection is the idea. Several different religious groups believe that. People within the church. There's some people within the church that believe that. It's it's an older view. Now, in fact, in one of our songs, I'm a poor wayfaring stranger, when the verse says there, my body sleep in the churchyard, some newer songbooks have even edited that because of this prevalent idea of soul sleep, and they've taken that line out and replaced it with something else. Why is it wrong then to go to this passage to teach that doctrine? Well, again, we're hopping in the middle of Solomon's thoughts here. It would be unjust to go to any portion of Ecclesiastes without considering where we're at in his journey towards wisdom. Remember, he's conflicted so far. He hasn't reached his conclusion. What he says in Ecclesiastes 9 clearly contradicts things that are said in other places in Scripture. Because we're seeing him grow up. We're seeing him try out all these various things and find that they're fallacious. We would expect to find then contradictions, as we have already in the book of Ecclesiastes. Now, these aren't contradictions like you think of. This is similar to when Satan spoke to Christ, right? We have his words recorded. That doesn't mean what he said was true. We just have a record of his conversation with Jesus. And the same thing is being done in Ecclesiastes. We are hopping in the middle of a discussion where he is progressing towards this grand conclusion, but we have to keep in mind that he's not there yet. Okay? He hasn't reached his conclusion just yet. Okay, so we're in Ecclesiastes 9 and verse 6. He says, "Indeed, their love, their hate, and their zeal have already perished, and they will no longer have a share in all that is done under the sun." Go then, he says, eat your bread in happiness, drink your wine with a cheerful heart, for God has already approved your works. Now, I think what we mean by this in verse 7 is that God knows that life is, vanity, so you might as well do whatever you want to. That's God's gift to you, as the writer said earlier in the book, if you recall. Verse 8, he says, "Let your clothes be white all the time." Let me scroll down here. "Let your clothes be white all the time. Let not oil be lacking on your head. Enjoy life with the woman whom you love all the days of your fleeting life. He has given to you under the sun. For this is your reward in life, and in your toil in which you have labored under the sun." So he says, since death is a equalizer for all, whether you're righteous or clean or unclean or good or evil or whatever, sacrifice or don't sacrifice. He says, since that's just an equalizer for all, he says you might as well just live life to the fullest, right? Carpe diem, YOLO, you only live once, whatever you want to say or however you want to describe it. He is basically saying, as he said several times throughout the book of Ecclesiastes, you might as well just live life however you want to, because at the end of the day, it's all vanity anyways, is his conclusion here. Does this seem like a biblical idea to you? Not at all. Not at all. Especially this, let your clothes be white all the time. Let not oil be lacking on your head. I mean, James says the exact opposite of this in James chapter 4, right? So again, he's testing things out. He's trying different conclusions. At the end of the day, though, he finds that they're all vanity. All right, let's look at verse 10. He said, "Whatever your hand finds to do, do it with all your might, for there is no activity or planning or knowledge or wisdom in Sheol where you are going." Your version may say Hades there, or the grave. So again, he says there's no activity, there's no planning, there's no knowledge, there's no wisdom in Sheol where you're going. And again, that's unqualified. That doesn't matter if you're good or evil, sinner or righteous, sacrifice or don't sacrifice, whatever. It says you don't have any activity, no planning, no knowledge, no wisdom. All right. Again, I'd just like to bring to your attention a couple passages. One is Luke 16, where this rich man has a conversation with Abraham while he's in Sheol. Not to mention that Lazarus is there too. If there's no knowledge in Sheol, if there's no understanding or no memory or anything like that, as you see here in verse 10, then how could you enjoy the blessings or experience the torment that is there, you see? And so this passage plainly goes against things that we know from other scriptures, but that's because he's in the middle of this journey. This is not the conclusion of the matter. This is not the advice. This is not the attitude that we should take upon ourselves and the advice that we should follow. We should look at what's at the end of the book, not what's here in the middle, because it's a progression. Okay. He says in verse 11, "I saw again under the sun that the race is not to the swift, and the battle is not to the warriors, and neither is bread to the wise, nor wealth to the discerning, nor favor to men of ability, for time and chance overtake them all." Again, you see this on coffee mugs, right? But what's he saying here? Time. There's that word time, for time and chance overtake them all. When you think back to Ecclesiastes 3, remember all those time to live, a time to die, a time to all this, right? And he said that those times are set up by God. So what he's saying here in Ecclesiastes 9 verse 11 is, what's the point of life? He says, the race doesn't go to the fastest person. The battle doesn't go to the warriors. The bread doesn't go to the wise men, or the wealth to those that are discerning, nor favor to men of ability, because they all are going to die, right? They're all going to come to an end, and they're not going to know when that's going to happen. They're not going to know when his time is, and So really, what's the point of it all? You might win 1,000 battles, but you're still going to be just as dead as all the other dead people that have ever died, right? You might have all the glory in the world, but all that glory is going to vanish away. All that name is going to vanish away when you die and go into Sheol. Because in Sheol, there's no memory, there's no knowledge, there's no activity, there's no planning, there's no life. You're just dead. Like Rover, you're dead all over. That's the idea. Or actually more like a lion, you're dead all. I guess more like Simba, you're dead all over. Because, what he said earlier about the dogs and the lions. Okay, verse 12. Moreover, he says, man does not know his time. Like fish caught in a treacherous net, and birds trapped in a snare, so the Son of Man are ensnared at an evil time when it suddenly falls on them. By the way, side note, here we see more about the use of good and evil in Ecclesiastes. Good seems to not necessarily mean morally good, but instead good in terms of good in terms of enjoying life to the fullest here, having a good reward in life here, whereas evil seems like the opposite of that. So he says, so the sons of man are ensnared at an evil time. Well, hold on. Let's compare this to earlier in the book. Ecclesiastes chapter 3. We have a time to do this, a time to do that. And the one who sets up the time, verse 11, is God, right? So why does he say in Ecclesiastes 9, right, that the time that they die at is evil, if he said that God set it up? Again, the writer of Ecclesiastes has a problem with the world as he sees it in these moments. And he has a problem with the way that God has set the world up as he sees it in these moments. That's not his conclusion, but that's where he's at so far, all right? He's not happy with the way that God has set up things. If he could order the universe, he would do it a lot differently. He's made it very plain throughout this book. And so this little discourse on death here, and by the way, if you wanted to title this section, verses 1 through 12, you could just title it, Death Revisited or something like that. And so while while we rethink, meditate on what's happened in this section, he's basically just resigned himself to die. I mean, he wants his readers to realize that, no matter if they can keep reading this book, and it's not going to help him any. At least that's how he thinks right now. Because everybody dies, the playing field is leveled upon death, and it doesn't seem like there's anything after that. Again, this is similar to something that he said earlier in the book, if you recall. Remember, he says in verse 19, the fate of the sons of men and the fate of beasts is the same. As one dies, so the other, right? He said, there is no advantage for man over the beast. He says, all go to the same place. All come from dust, and all return to the dust. Who knows that the breath of man ascends upward and the breath of the beast ascends downward? In other words, can you prove that men go to some, wonderful place after death? He says, I've seen that nothing is better than that man should be happy in his activities and his lot, for who will bring him to see what will occur after him? So again, this viewpoint that he's taken in chapter 3 is similar to what he's taken in chapter 9, and that is from a purely materialistic, temporary standpoint. He gives no consideration to what happens after death. In fact, he denies that anything happens after death in Ecclesiastes chapter 9. It's not till later in chapter 11 and 12 that we see some hint of optimism in the preacher's words and in the narrator's words at the end of the book. All right? Okay, tonight we're going to cover a pretty large section in Ecclesiastes. We're going to cover verse 13 through chapter 10 and verse 20. Okay? So that's the plan for tonight. Chapter 9, verse 13 through chapter 10 and verse 20. That's going to be tonight at 5 p.m. Okay? Give me a few minutes, 10 minutes. I'll start back at 10:10. I'll restart the the countdown, the music, and all that sort of stuff at 10:05. All right, so you can tune back in then if you'd like. So y'all go get yourself a coffee, go get yourself a water like I'm gonna do, and I'll see you then.